Talking about Mars-Jupiter conjunction. Mars is about discipline and courage. Jupiter is about higher purpose and principle. This shows us fighting for what we believe in, but maybe being too fanatical or pushy about it. So check this out. So Mars-Jupiter conjunction is the alignment of two pretty compatible energies. Mars is the energy of defense and aggression, mainly to defend our territory and to, in some ways, conquer new territory and live without limits. You want to understand Mars this way because it's really the motivation. It's really the courage to take on challenges and take on the right challenges. It shows what we're willing to fight for. And we're all willing to fight for something, if not just our own survival. Even people who have a weak Mars, if you attack them and threaten their life, they will put up some kind of defense, usually. Because that sort of primal instinctive animal in us wants to survive and will fight to the death if necessary. So, aside from something so, extreme, Mars is the part of us that doesn't want to be told what to do, doesn't want to be reined in or fenced in. Look at children, and when you tell them, no, I know you can't do that, it's like, I want to do it. I'm me. And again, one of the reasons why we rebel against that is because, even from a very young age, someone telling us, no, you can't do that, they have control over us. And we don't want anyone to have control over us, because if you have control over me, then you could kill me. You have control over me. And I want to control myself. So this is that tamasic nature of Mars, is to destroy things, or want to destroy things that we feel have control over us. And we really see that sort of control part and that fear of not having control part in the Scorpio part of Mars, because it's more the psychological part. And of course Scorpio is the psychological quality of Mars, because it's the feminine sign and the watery sign. And you see more of the action, like I'm going to now do this and enthusiastically pursue this thing that I want to create or destroy, and this energy that we put forth into often destroying what we think is weak in the Aries part, and the enthusiasm to say, okay, I'm gonna do this. So most people who accomplish almost anything, especially things that are unique and entrepreneurial, and they have a strong Mars, because the enthusiasm and the courage to push forward in spite of what anyone says, they'll have to face a struggle and a battle. And Mars is where we're willing to fight, and we're not willing to fight for everything. When that comes in contact with Jupiter, then we have a higher purpose and a higher principle that we're defending, and that's worth fighting for, because that's what Jupiter brings to the table. Jupiter brings higher purpose, wisdom, a sense of meaning. And I should be careful saying wisdom, because it means it's always wise. It doesn't mean that the wisdom is always good. It's what we think is wisdom at any given time. And I use these sort of extreme examples with Jupiter, because Jupiter is said to be the great benefic, and it's always good, and I want to bring Jupiter stuff into everything because it's good, it's wise, it's my wisdom. Sometimes it's the corrupted wisdom as well. It's what we believe in, and sometimes the things we believe in are not very good. And again, I use examples like, for example, racism is a belief. White supremacy and Nazism and, all the Jews should go to hell and the blacks are bad, and women are inferior, or I don't know, beliefs. Our beliefs are related to Jupiter. There's a whole movement now of men going alone, men going it alone, where they think women are just useless and they've turned their back on women. That's their belief. It's like a religion. It's very Jupiter, very Jupiterian. So and Mars would be there fighting for that cause. You see why do people fight for their cause? Fight Mars for their cause, Jupiter. Now again, many times there'll be more fight than there will be cause. People that are just looking to fight, and they just shift from cause to cause. Some people have a higher cause, but they don't fight for it very much. They just kind of go through the motions. When you bring the two together, you'll see the person, let's say if it's in a natal chart, they're willing to fight for their causes. And they're always looking for a higher cause to fight for. But you'll see that'll be the case. Now, depending on the sign, and especially as you know, when I talk about these things, I put a lot of attention on the element, fire, air, water, earth signs, because they show the psychology and the sort of temperament. Of course, both Mars and Jupiter, when they're joined, they have a fiery and also a watery quality. People overlook the watery quality of Mars, but it's actually very important, because a lot of our battles are mainly psychological battles with ourself. Just as prominent. It's in some ways more frustrating, and it's why our emotions can be very sabotaging, self-sabotaging. We can be self-sabotaging often with our own feelings and emotions, because Mars is actually that feeling that I mentioned before about being controlled, and that frustration that comes when we don't know what to do and when we're not clear in where we're going. All that's Mars stuff. So Mars and Jupiter, when they come together, for instance, in fire signs, then of course they're very fiery. Clear principle, clear purpose, and I'm ready to fight for it. And it's often, this logic that thinks I'm right. Logic doesn't mean intelligent. Intelligence is Mercury. Logic is mainly Mars, and also the Sun. Now, again, logic is only good for things like math or formulas or systems. Systems are very logical. But conversations, intelligence, discrimination is often not logical. It's a different thing. Because again, logic can be used to back you right into a corner, because it's just a series of black and white statements. For example, men are stronger than women, men are smarter than women, therefore men are better than women. Like, it's these kind of closed-ended statements. This is why people can be very fanatical about their religion and all of that, if they're too logical about it and they lose the nuance. So you might see Mars and Jupiter, for instance, with a lot of fire, to see this kind of logical fanaticism. Maybe not. Again, it all depends, because they're also both in good dignity often when they're in the fire signs, naturally. With other factors notwithstanding, it can just be a very strong, powerful, clear defensive and, elevation of good principles and discipline, which is the higher quality of Mars, is to be disciplined and to fight our own struggles rather than to inflict them on others. And if we have good teachings, then we learn from our mistakes and we become more disciplined. So when Mars and Jupiter go into earth signs, it can be sort of clogged up in these conservative, rigid beliefs if they're joined. Now, Of course, Mars is exalted in an Earth sign, but that's kind of a different thing. Of course, if you were to get Mars and Jupiter in that sign, Capricorn, Jupiter would be debilitated, Mars would be exalted. That's a sort of subtle thing. Again, just to understand the quality, Earth is where things slow down and get really stuck. So there can always be frustration when Mars and Jupiter, or either one, are in an Earth sign, where they can get kind of stuck in the materiality of things, in the literal meaning of things, and it can be where that conservatism comes forth. It can also be where things become very practical and very applicable. But especially for Jupiter in the Earth, it gets really stuck. Mars actually can get pretty stable in Earth, but and bring those actions into concrete form for something practical. Jupiter, his higher, more metaphysical energy, gets really stuck in Earth signs often, because then it's about expansiveness and growth, but in material ways, which can lead to greed and all that stuff, which is the shadow side of Jupiter. When they're in air signs, it becomes quite intellectual. Again, not the greatest element for Mars and Jupiter. It can really be this kind of fanaticism around ideas and wanting to reform culture and ideas, and really get into a weird kind of false logic. Again, many times discrimination and logic look very similar, and we certainly think we're being logical when we're lacking discrimination. Again, a hyper rigid application of data in these black and white categories that seems so logical, and it seems like it's so intelligent. It's often not intelligent. Look, if you can listen to fanatics explain their point of view, it sounds very logical, and it sounds like they're using their discrimination, and they're completely not. You see it everywhere these days. It's lacking discrimination. It's lacking intelligence, which is not Jupiter. It's Mercury. To go in there and, for instance, to look for the flaws in our own argument. Only someone who is fanatical can be 100% certain of everything they say. Nothing is 100%. So when you see people who, for instance, try to make their case and make their argument, and they ignore all of the flaws and holes in their argument, then they're not being intelligent, they're being fanatical. And when you see fanatical views, then there's not a lot of discrimination. There's a lot of fanatical views, for instance, with the zodiac debate that's been happening. Some of the people, I've already said many times, even though Vedic astrology is based on the sidereal zodiac, I totally understand how people could be using the tropical zodiac. It's not a part of Vedic astrology, because it's not. Every Vedic astrology text refers and uses the sidereal zodiac. It's not even a debate. But you'll have people who are, many of the ones that are using the tropical zodiac now and still calling it Vedic astrology, are fanatical in that they don't even think the sidereal zodiac itself is legitimate. I mean, it's just it's a ridiculous view. Frankly, it's just ridiculous. The original zodiac is sidereal. And crazy enough, they still use nakshatras, they're sidereal. So how could it be completely illegitimate that sidereal zodiac is wrong when it comes to calculating the rashis? Again, and it seems like if you hear them explain it, it's like so logical. It's not logical. It's fanatical. Fanaticism doesn't have it's not logical. And so we can see fanaticism. This is what fanaticism looks like, separate from intelligence. The difference. So often if you get Mars, Jupiter in air, again, and it doesn't mean that at every iteration of fanaticism has Mars, Jupiter, and air signs. I'm just using that as an example that you can see. I've seen many times where when they associate in air signs, we become more fanatical than logical or sensible. And then water signs, of course, water is related to feeling and emotion, and you have this great sort of emotional reckoning, which you would see as Mars related to Scorpio. And then Jupiter, which also rules the water sign of Pisces, brings a lot of mysticism. You can really see a lot of mysticism and creativity and really working through emotional, psychological barriers. Of course, the fire and the water signs with that conjunction are much better, much more holistic than other elements because they rule those elements. And again, when you see it Mars-Jupiter relationship or conjunction in water signs, you'll see that synthesis, that emotional synthesis, and that emotional courage, that emotional hope. So really they bring together the hope of Jupiter and the courage of Mars. Now again, because there's a lot of ways for it to interact, you can have one-way aspects with these two, like Jupiter could just be aspecting Mars, like in a trine. Mars could just be aspecting Jupiter, one way, through these different elements. So I'm not necessarily just talking about a conjunction, although when you see the conjunction, that's the easiest way to see the unification or the yoga of those things. That's literally what yoga means, is a joining. But I'm also just talking about the association. And so we could definitely see the potential for fanaticism, but also the potential to really, see what we're willing to fight to defend, and then how we defend it. And again, sometimes, like for instance, I use the example of the fanaticism. Sometimes there can be that part of it is fanatical, but then let's say there's a really powerful Mercury. Well, then that brings in the openness to other people's views, and the Moon and Venus. There's other planets. It's not just those two. And I'm not saying that it is, but I just give examples in these videos so you can understand the difference. It's really the difference in many ways between Mercury and Mars, and also Mars and Jupiter. They both have the potential for the fanaticism. Mercury and the Moon and Venus, also Saturn, the other planets, are really the ones that bring more recognition, particularly Mercury and also Saturn. Those neutral planets can really sort of counteract, especially the Mars-Jupiter fanaticism, and the potential is really counteracted by Mercury and Saturn, so that we're evaluating all sides of an argument, of an issue, and not just ready to fight and battle with, because of this stream of logic that makes it so logical and buttoned down that nothing else can even encroach. That's when you see the extremes of these two planets not really working together very well.